Welcome to Thought to Action, presented by the London Center for Policy Research. This is number 4 in our series, China Red Alert, where we talk about China and all things that relate to our national security and the policy which we should be pursuing regarding securing the Pacific and our allies. We will be delving deeply into important issues, examining ideas, discussing solutions, and putting our thoughts into action as we always do. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer, the president of the London Center for Policy Research. If you enjoy our videos, would like to help us create more, join our Patreon community at patreon.com, Thought to Action. Patreons are able to preview our content and also participate in our exclusive Ask Us Anything question and answer sessions. Also, please subscribe to us via YouTube and all the other social media outlets we're out there. So I'm joined today to talk about this important issue by Navy Captain retired Pete O'Brien, one of our distinguished fellows. So Pete, welcome to Thought to Action, China Red Alert.
Thank you, Tony. And I think this is one of those things where there's so much talk about vis-a-vis the United States and China, United States and its allies in China. It's a frightening situation in many respects, because I think to a certain extent we have already demonstrated that the Biden administration is, if you will, not in step with a coherent plan to address the China situation.
Yeah, so Pete, I'd like to frame it in that term, because one of the notable things is that the Trump administration really did break out and push its own path. This basically go in directions that the establishment would have never gone without Trump. For example, Trump going into North Korea. The last time we had an outreach was when we had, I think it was Jimmy Carter, wasn't it Jimmy, who jumped into the nuclear negotiations back in the 90s? And I'm going somewhere with all of this by the fact that one of the prominent people now involved in the negotiations regarding China and relating to North Korea, because North Korea is essentially a subordinate state of China, is a woman named Wendy Sherman. So let's frame this a little bit for our audience to understand that the Tony Blinken, Wendy Sherman recycling of failure that we now see before us regarding China.
Well, Blinken, of course, was one of the deputy secretaries of state under President Obama, and had a hand. I'm not sure what exactly the extent of his hand was, but had a hand in the negotiations with Iran over Iran's nuclear program. Sherman, of course, had a hand in the negotiations with North Korea in the 90s. You mentioned Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter, to those who may have forgotten the dates, Jimmy Carter, the former president, went to speak with the North Koreans after Kim Il-sung died in July of '93. Later in '93, I believe, was late in the year, Carter went to Korea and North Korea, and basically they opened up negotiations, which led eventually to an agreement that was supposed to freeze the North Korean nuclear weapons program, but in fact did not, as we've seen in the last, during the Obama administration, we saw the North Koreans detonate several small nuclear weapons. So there seems to have been if you will, a cognitive disconnect between what the folks were saying in the Clinton and Obama and now in the Biden administration, and what the results were. And I would offer this up just before we get in any further, is in the if you will, the pre-World War II world, it was understood that policy could lead to war, and that there was no value in making an agreement if the agreement wasn't going to benefit the country making the agreement. In the rise of the nuclear weapons, I think we saw a shift there certainly among foreign policy side, on the foreign policy side of any government, is the foreign policy folks took the position not that warfare was an extension of political policy, but in light of nuclear weapons, warfare was a failure of foreign policy. And what happened there was they went, as that split became wider and wider, we got to a situation where, from a foreign policy perspective, any agreement was of benefit, no agreement was a failure. And so we see again and again and again, we see foreign policy doyens calling for this, that, and the other kind of agreement, even though agreement is simply making the situation worse, really. And I think we are sort of caught up in that ball of wax again.
So yeah, arguably, and I've seen some historians refer to Lord Chamberlain's, the Prime Minister of England, basically kind of almost charting this forward by the fact that he knew that Herr Hitler was not going to actually go with the agreement to stop his aggression, essentially that he was buying time. Now, I understand there's some level of, I think, revisionism there. Some people believe Chamberlain was sincere, some don't. But the idea was Chamberlain's goal was simply to get an agreement, and others knew that that was never going to work. Are you saying here that essentially we've seen a wholesale adoption of basically a policy of appeasement? Just getting an agreement is all they want. They don't care about the ultimate outcome or results of their agreement.
I think I don't want to put words in someone's mouth, but there is a sense that when you look at the agreements that were either written and created in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and in the 80s, some of the 80s, ones that were put forward but not signed, was that the foreign policy community wanted agreements. They didn't care what the results were as much as any agreement was of benefit. And I'm probably being too general there, but
well, look, and some of the specifics you and I have worked. I watched with a front row seat the nuclear negotiations, as did you, in the early to mid 90s of the North Koreans and us. And to your point and others, this is all observable. Wendy Sherman was involved pretty much that entire decade in the 90s on the issues regarding trying to ensure that North Korea did not go nuclear. Pete, how many nuclear explosions have we had since Wendy Sherman worked on stopping North Korea from having nuclear weapons? Yeah. So I think by any measure, rational measure, that policy failed, right? Am I getting something wrong? The policy was to stop it. They put a lot of effort into it, got an agreement, and it didn't stop it. So well, my concern, yeah, go ahead. Am I missing something?
You put your finger on much of the problem of modern government is programs are created, ideas are put forward, they don't yield any of the intended results, and so we double down on it.
But she was rewarded for her behavior, right? I mean, she got kicked upstairs. Right. So clearly, at least in their policy world, failure is acceptable as long as you get the agreement. That's my impression. Now,
well, and I would go back to it. I think they, from their perspective, I mean essentially the modern, if you will, academic rooted foreign policy establishment. From that perspective, any agreement has benefit. No agreement is a loss.
Even if, and let me add a small note on that, even if that means your side loses, that is to say that you have measurable failures that result in your own national security policy being compromised. Is that accurate? Because I think that's what I think
they would respond that we have made, in this narrow little area where we're negotiating, whatever it might be, we've made war less likely. Therefore, that's a good.
Yeah, I don't know if I believe that, since nuclear explosions tend to get people's attention and not in a good way. But I do remember within the last term of Obama, where you and I were both working with certain members of Congress, making sure that missiles didn't hit a certain island state. Just saying, that was a grave concern, and I think a realistic one. So let's move on to China.
Well, and I think this is an important, what you just said there is take a look at these folks. Secretary Blinken, Deputy Secretary Sherman. And then look at what they just did. Secretary of State Blinken met with the Chinese in Alaska in March, middle of March, and while everybody always will paint their own will paint the event in their own favor, the reception that what took place there received in the rest of the world's foreign policy environment was that the United States was sorely embarrassed. The Chinese foreign minister showed up and basically read the United States the Riot Act.
Yeah.
Last week, was it last week or the week before? Deputy Secretary Sherman went to China, and the meeting starts off with them presenting her with a list of problems that the United States needs to address, and to include butting out of China's civil rights, human rights issues, and leaving China alone. We have to essentially stop at the coastline when it comes to human rights, and insisting that we not press forward with certain legal cases against the Chinese for technology theft.
So the obvious answer in if I believe, I'm an operator, you're an analyst, I'm just kind of here for the ride. But looking back at what we observed from Sherman and the academic Democrat leftist establishment, which is now in the State Department, and this has been going on again over and over for decades. This isn't simply a Democrat issue. This is a infrastructure regarding the State Department issue. So I would argue, Pete, based on what I'm seeing, the methods that Wendy Sherman and the State Department have used, Tony Blinken, that they've used consistently to achieve their goals are now going to be applied to China, because we've already seen, as you point out, Blinken has been reprimanded publicly by the Chinese. Wendy Sherman is basically told, you will follow our lead and do these things, or else. It seems to me that we are going to allow the failures regarding the Iran agreement that Blinken is part of, the North Korean nuclear deal that the Sherman, they're simply recycling failure. Now they're going to apply it to China. Am I missing something?
Well, no, and I think there's an interesting event taking place right now. As you know, 5 years ago, the International Court in The Hague issued a ruling against the Chinese claims in the South China Sea. And it was a definitive ruling. There was absolutely no ground, and there was no place in there that you could shadow it and say, well, actually they meant this. They didn't. It was very clear the Chinese were just flat out told that they were wrong. Since then, the Chinese have paid zero credibility, zero loyalty to the law kind of thing. And just recently, they moved a small squadron of Chinese Coast Guard vessels down to those reefs, and are now preventing the Philippine fishermen from fishing waters that they have fished for hundreds and hundreds of years. And I would think this would be a perfect opportunity, a very low grade kind of event. This would be a perfect opportunity for the United States to step in and say, wait a minute, and put a couple of ships down there, provide some escorts for the Philippine Navy, let this thing work its way forward, and make it very clear that the United States is going to support the law and going to support the territorial claims of our allies. And this would be an easy thing to do. And yet there doesn't seem to be, at least right now, today, there doesn't seem to be any indication that that kind of thing is going forward. And yet it would send, and it's a kind of a digital event. If you don't do it, it sends a clear signal that you're not going to stick up for your ally, you're not going to stick up for the law, and it's also going to send a signal to our other allies in the region that maybe the Americans aren't really going to be there. On the other hand, if you do it, it flips all that around. It sends a very clear signal that you will support the law, that you will support your allies, then you are going to be there. So it's a very simple event we have right now that we could go out and we could make this thing stick. And I just don't see us doing it. And I think that's both a DOD and a secretary and a State Department failure to grab an opportunity.
So yeah, I'd like to focus our next red alert China on the very topic regarding the Chinese actions within the South China Sea and what we can expect from them regarding increased aggression, because this is one of the reasons I brought up the Chamberlain metaphor regarding appeasement, because I don't believe for a minute the moment you appease them, you're going to stop them. They're going to continue to do it. And basically their philosophy, Pete, from my own work on this issue, is that the Chinese believe that their law, not our law, is the one that they should be following, because their law is older than our law, Western civilization. And they believe that it's within their right to re-expand out to the boundaries of the Ming Dynasty because they can, because they're bigger than us and they're older than us. And why is our law more valid than their law? And I think that's what we on our side fail to understand, is that the Chinese have a completely different view of the world and what we view it. So let me finish with that as a question. Do Blinken and Sherman, do they understand the Chinese perspective of the world regarding how they're going to move forward?
I would answer that in very simple as I don't believe they do. I would say no. I can't prove that, but I don't know what's in their head. But my suspicion is that like a lot of people these days, they're a little bit mushy on what exactly Western civilization means and why we should be defending it. And my sense is they're going to turn and say, well, the Chinese tradition and law has every bit of right to assert itself, as does Western civilization, the Western's concepts of justice and equal protection of the law. And of course, to that I would answer wrong. If you believe that, then you should not be representing the United States.
Right.
You can believe that if you want, but you shouldn't be doing it as a constitutional officer of our government. And I think that's a real problem. I think if that could be, if you could assert that was in fact, it would be grounds for telling the guy to go home. It just absolutely shouldn't be allowed to happen. But really, that you put your finger on it. What we're really facing here is a conflict between Western civilization and the Chinese civilization. And that conflict doesn't necessarily need to brew up into a hot war, but there is a conflict, there is a struggle between these two civilizations. And that is exactly what we need to face. And the folks who are leading that fight in any administration need to be essentially devout adherents to Western civilization, or we're going to lose ground to the Chinese civilization.
So, yeah, no, I think you nailed it right there at the end, Pete. So, Pete, as always, thank you for joining me today for this Thought to Action China Red Alert. Obviously, I want to invite you back, and we'll try to get Gordon. I'd like to try to get Gordon on here, Gordon Chang, to talk about kind of the South China Sea issue and what we see going forward, and maybe even forecasting what we think the outcome is going to be. And this is one of those things that I hope I'm wrong. I hope we're wrong. But I don't think so. And I think we're going to see a kind of, like, as I mentioned, a recycling of failure regarding concepts. And the only reason you'd want to recycle people because you want to have them essentially recycle their performance. And I think that's what we're seeing here. So thank you all for joining us today for our special edition of Thought to Action China Red Alert, number 4 in our series. We'll be doing more on this. I thank you for supporting this channel and this podcast. If you like our program, please help us expand content by joining our Patreon at patreon.com Thought to Action, where you can preview Thought to Actions and join us in our exclusive question and answer session, Ask Us Anything. So please make sure you like, share, subscribe, hit the notification buzzer for YouTube. That helps the algorithm. Follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, and all the other social media. So I'm Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer, President of the London Center for Policy Research. Thank you for joining us today on Thought to Action.